Welcome to the K2 Sales Podcast. I'm your host, Karen Kelly. Every week, I'll be sitting down with a sales executive where they'll share their stories and experiences that produce game-changing results. Let's be honest, sales can be a tough game. I'm sure at some point, we've all delivered a less than stellar demo, been ghosted by a client or two, and sometimes maybe we did more talking than listening. And that's where I can help. The stories and insights our guests share can be applied to your own business, your territory, or with your team, so you're not reinventing the wheel. Our weekly tactics and strategies help you get out of your head and start creating your own path towards game-changing results. Welcome back to the K2 Sales Podcast. I'm your host, Karen Kelly. Now, I'm delighted to share the conversation I had with Will Barron, who's the founder of salesman.com and the host of the salesman.com podcast. He's also a two-time author, and his books are free on his website. We'll include the link, but the first one is Selling Made Simple, and the second one is a step-by-step process to find and close more deals in 2024 using a series of proven selling frameworks. And that's where we're really focused is, how do we find more deals? People say pipelines are dry, but we really dug into, how can we create these pipelines that are, that are accurate, that we are dealing with the right person at the right time. I'm taking the time to understand their challenges and really coming to the table with a bold hypothesis. And even if we're incorrect in our hypothesis, it still shows that we're on the right track. So maybe it's a problem they've already solved, but is it not better than showing up with nothing? We also talked about friction in the sales process and really, are we adding it? Are we aligned with our buyers so that we're, when they're reaching out to us, we're aligning with their momentum, their energy, or are we slowing them down and kind of stalling the momentum that they've naturally created? I mean, everyone's trying to create urgency, align to it when they're coming to you and meet them where they're at. So definitely encourage you to take a listen if you're a business owner or a sales leader or an individual contributor. A lot of tactics here that will help you just really lean into your authenticity, whether you're on the phone cold calling. Yes, you still have to follow a framework, but buyers are programmed now to know what sales reps look and sound like because a lot of them are sounding the same and it's just expected behavior. So how can you just be a little bit different? How can you have a pattern interrupt where you're coming at it from a different lens, or there's just some levity and lightness and humor in it that does allow you to break through the noise and is a complete opposite of what's going on with ChatGPT. You are completely not a robot. You're a human being, but let people in on that. Let them feel it. So take a listen and let us know if you've implemented any of his suggestions into your engagements and what were you able to achieve as a result of that. So hope you enjoy the conversation. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next time. Hey, I'd like to welcome Will Barron to the podcast. Welcome, Will.
Thank you, Karen, for having me on. I'm really excited to have a chat with you.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, congratulations on 2 books, Selling Made Simple and the Step-by-Step Process to Find and Close More Deals in 2024. And I that's where I want to focus because I think, when I look at my own business and my clients, they're struggling. And when you look at competing against ChatGPT, a lot of people are solely using that and not really, injecting their own personalization, which, is really contributing to the noise. But for those who are choosing to still create that humanized, meaningful approach, can you talk high level about, what you are seeing in terms of what's breaking through to close more deals or even find more deals? Maybe we start with find more deals in 2024.
So, and before we click record, we kind of we click record before we got into it because maybe we have some disagreement on this. I am so unexcited by the AI tools out there for sales specifically that I think that it's almost a waste of time at this moment in time to be trying to leverage them. And you've kind of just alluded to it. If you use any of the generative AI tools to try and generate an email, a meeting template, a presentation to build your ICP, you're just leveraging data that's been fed in there that it's been scraped from elsewhere. So inherently nothing is original. And to break through the noise of spam, there needs to be a level of originality to it. I don't think it's the most important thing. You've got to get the right message in front of the right person at the right time. But once you're ticking those 3 boxes, And if other people are ticking those boxes as well, and you're trying to outcompete other people in the same space as you, then it's you as a human, which is the differentiator, as opposed to typing into ChatGPT how to do this or how to influence this person or what does this person want, when they're just regurgitating a blog post from gong.io or salesman.com. And it's slightly infuriating when salespeople think that the barrier to entry to winning someone's business in the B2B space is so low that a generative AI tool can give them the answers that they're looking for.
And I think I would agree with that when you think that some people are using that solely and they're relying on maybe the prompt is poor as well, right? And what it yields is not good, but then they're not tweaking it or adding any personalization, which is contributing to the noise. But you did mention the word human there, and what I think is, when you look at the reason people buy, 53% of the reason is the person. They like to know that they're dealing with a human. So what are you seeing that people can be doing to really highlight and bring that humanized approach to their buying experiences?
So the first thing is coming to the table with a bold hypothesis of the problem that you think you can solve. None of this will help you find more leads, which I seem to get from agencies a gazillion emails like that every single day that are obviously automated and obviously just spammy. Somehow they're still getting into my inbox, but 6 months from now they absolutely won't. So no broad strokes. We need to give the right message to the right person at the right time to a specific individual within an organization. Less of an avatar, more of the person that you're connecting with, whether that be cold call, whether that be a connection request on LinkedIn, which then generates a conversation, which leads to the potential of a meeting, or whether that be cold outreach, in-person events, whatever it is. If you this is a kind of a, with the students in our training program, like a test that I ask them to use if they send me a terrible email for a review. I asked them, if you verbatim said this to someone at a conference, would they look at you like you are crazy? And if the answer is yes, then it is not conversational enough. It's not specific enough. The call to action isn't bold enough. And then the hypothesis of value isn't bold enough either. So if you would feel uncomfortable sharing what you're communicating over an email, LinkedIn message, um, in a text-based format, if you'd be uncomfortable sharing that in person with someone, then something's probably off. That's kind of the first test I tend to give people.
And sometimes when when you are in person, it's very conversational. There's just an element of there's a lax feeling to it. And then when you read something and you're just thinking, I would never, like, that's a great litmus test, because you're like, I would never say that. It just sounds so buttoned up and
Yep.
so not realistic. And I think that's good. Even when I reread it, I'm like, or send it to yourself and be
Yep.
like, no, like, even to look at the mobile view. But what I heard you say there is having a bold hypothesis, but also, and we'll talk on that in a second. But just even what I find is a lot of people are just, yes, they have an avatar or a persona, but the language is so generic that it is not cutting through the noise. That really resonates with that person, that they stop and they're like, yeah, you know what, that actually, I can see that happening, or I can see that happening if we don't do something. So, what would you say for those people who perhaps are calling on someone they've never done that job before? Like, how can they really embody and really like understand their language? Like, basically, look inside their window to get a sense of how they are doing the job, how they are solving these problems. What are some ways people can do?
Sure. Well, it's not as big of a barrier to get over than what it perhaps seems. So my background is medical device sales. I was selling endoscopic camera systems to surgeons here in the UK, and I only knew a slither of the procedure, the tiniest bit. As soon as the camera system was rolled out of the operating room, or as soon as another surgeon would take over for a different part of the procedure, I'm out of it. I have no idea. But for that sliver of the value that my product delivers to the buyer, I would absolutely know, not as much as the surgeon, but not far off. I would be going to surgical training classes, and I would be using the simulators and learning to suture and obviously fooling around. There's zero consequences to me doing that, as opposed to someone with someone else's life literally in their hands. But I went above and beyond to understand that sliver as close to the professional that I'm trying to support as I possibly could. And that's what we need to do with our potential customers. So you don't need, if you're selling to CMOs, you don't need to know everything that CMO does day in, day out. But whatever you've got the feature, you've got the benefit, and then you've got the desire. Whatever the desired outcome is of the feature and benefits that you are pitching to that CMO, you should understand at a deep level why they would want to move forward with it. And you do that by speaking to, if you're new to the organization, hopefully there's an amazing onboarding process. Obviously, you and I know that is somewhat rare. But let's say that you've had an amazing onboarding process. Then you go and interview some of your colleagues, find the highest performer in your team, sit down with them for an afternoon. Just be selfish and just hound them with questions of what conversations do their buyers like to have, what starts conversations, what stops conversations, what is counterintuitive about the conversations you're having. Go to the marketing team, see what messaging works at a broader, more one-to-many conversation as opposed to a one-to-one conversation from the sales perspective. And then if you can, interview some customers. If you are new to an organization, that first couple of customers that you get through the door, you should absolutely be spending some time with them and ask them the question, why did you want to work with us? What did I offer that you didn't see elsewhere? And it's all, none of this is rocket science. It's all fundamental stuff, but perhaps taking that half a step back to better understand the market, improve your business acumen seems like a waste of time in the moment, but that'll give you 3 or 4 steps forward over the next few months as you start to have more conversations.
All great ideas, and one that I see is, you probably work in an organization where you have a CMO or you have a
Yep.
CFO.
Yep.
Go and sit and have a coffee with them and say, what kind of emails are you getting? Like, what is your strategic initiatives you're working on this quarter? And just kind of like you have that source accessible to you, use it. And even the interviews I love because I think when when you have access to these folks that purchase or even that jobs to be done framework after the fact, like it's so valuable to find out, like, what was that before state, like why did forget you came with us, but like what were you doing before, because that's the problem. And I just feel so many people, they have an understanding of a soundbite, and I hear what you're saying, that you only needed a sliver, and that's fine. But when they have not even a sliver, and then they're like, well, I'm afraid of these cold calls and I don't feel confident. It's because they don't have enough information to engage in a conversation, because it's like, here's are my lanes, and when you go outside is I actually don't know how it works, and I don't know the chain of command. And I feel like when you get business acumen, you understand, because I too was in medical devices, and so I understood my audience, but there were so many in the hospital, there were so many passovers and departments that connected with that. And if I didn't understand and was able to help them navigate the buying and how procurement came into this and how legal, I was out the door. And so I feel that sometimes people are just phoning it in a little bit, and they're not really taking a step back and trying to fully understand that when they're having a conversation and they're wondering, why aren't they picking up my call, or why are they, is it not continuing, why is my email not getting responded? It's because you're only on the surface, and if they just took a step back and really understood things, they could lead with their curiosity, and they could really have these meaningful conversations that might teach your audience something or really invite them to come at it from a different perspective. And that's where you stand out.
I think most salespeople just don't care. They just don't care enough. Well, everything you just said then is amazing. Absolutely agree. Totally on board. Unfortunately, most people fall into sales roles, right? Very few 13-year-olds go, Mom, Dad, I want to be a B2B sales professional when I grow up. And I kind of fell into sales. I did a degree in chemistry, didn't want to do anything to do with chemistry, so then moved into chemical sales, selling chemical catalysts to the pharmaceutical industry, because I knew I wanted to get a bit of sales experience to launch a business at some point in the distant future. But most people don't want to work necessarily until they've had that kind of financial taste of financial success given to them. Most people don't start off wanting to work in sales. So you're absolutely right. That I think you tell me if you agree in this, but I think when I'm training people, a lot of the hurdle we've got to get over is helping them understand that the more that they care about the buyer, not in some hippie kind of wishy-washy way, like genuinely, the more you care about them, the more money you're going to make. You can provide for your family, retire early, buy the Porsche, whatever you're after. And so I think inherently everything you just said is absolutely true. And I think most salespeople know that as well. The problem is getting them to actually care about the situation they're in, and commit for 3 years to really go deep into the buyer's mindset, what they're doing day to day, and the problems that they're facing.
And so what I'm hearing there is just leading with service, and I think that desire to help, and even if that's at the the cost of, well, I'll help by introducing you to someone else because we're not a good fit. But how do you train people, maybe even the newer generation entering sales? Like, how do you teach that to really care and kind of, genuinely want to help when you might not be the winner?
So if you're not the winner, then we're talking a moral and ethical conversation, and so you should lead into moral and ethics because I think sales is a game, right? There's no point in trying to cheat it because eventually it'll come back to bite you in the ass. And sales inherently, there's a set of variables, there's a feedback loop, if you've won or lost. And so you can improve over the time. There's no magic to it. There are market forces that are unforeseen. COVID comes along, wipes out a bunch of your market overnight. Fine. A competitor comes along with a product that was absolutely incomprehensible, wipes out a bunch of your potential customers. Fine. But most of the time, sales is a game. Your inputs you have inputs that go in. There are variables in the system. There's a feedback loop. You win, you don't, you can prove. So when I coach people who are struggling to actually give an S about the buyer, even though they know that will lead to more deals later on, I start with that. So we take away a lot of the faff around sales. We make it simple of, if you do this, you're going to get one of these results. Then you can iterate. So that over and over and over, from prospecting to I call it diagnosis call, but a discovery call, to presentations, demos, business cases, everything else along the line. So it's just step by step by step by step. Once that's instilled in the individual, then we look at their actual goals. Why are they in this role? Most people have some kind of a selfless end of, when you keep asking why. It's, my mum's ill and I want to look after her. I want to retire early because I've got a young family, or I want to become financially independent because of this, this, and this. So what I do then is tie the sales activities to that end goal. And this is something that's very difficult to do if you're not very difficult to do. I find that this happens very rarely if you are an internal trainer, or if you're a sales leader and you're talking about this with your team, because they don't really want to open up to. But as an external trainer, when I come in, and you might be the same, Karen, people tend to open up more because they don't look like an idiot telling the boss that all they're here for is a Porsche and they don't really care about anything else. Whatever it may be, there might be more noble things that they're aiming towards. Sometimes it's a Porsche. But once you then start to tie those hopefully external goals where it's actually meaningful to them back to, okay, well, we need to do 150% of quota this year to do that. That means that we need to book this many meetings, this much outreach, and the outreach needs to be effective. And so how are you going to make it more effective? Oh, I'm going to learn more about this, this, and this. I'm going to improve my business acumen. I'm going to do some training with Karen. I'm going to read this book. I'm going to do this, this, and this. It's a long answer to a short question, but that's how I tie those two ends of the sales process together.
I love that. And so I do something similar, but just really activating that emotion, that purpose, like the why you do what you do. And I feel when leaders don't access that part of their team and they're painting them all with the same brush, like they're not going to motivate them because they're not uncovering the emotion underneath it. And the irony is that's how you also motivate your buyer. They're buying on the reptilian brain, which is emotion driven. So it's almost like good begets good. But if you're not doing it to your team, you can't expect them to be doing it to their prospects either.
Yeah, and all this, we're painting a pretty picture there, and a lot of this is dependent on having a product that the market at least wants a little bit. If you've got a product that nobody cares about, and no one else is in the team is having success, it's not just you on your own who are struggling, then all of this becomes a bit more difficult, right? So just to be very real with the audience. But if someone else in your team is hitting the numbers that you want to hit, then there's absolutely no reason why there's no trait of sales success that can't be learned and developed over a period of time. It's not like we're playing basketball and you've got to be 7'6". Otherwise, you're just going to get wrecked. There is no physical limitations to people having sales success. Obviously, if you've got experience in the space, if I was training a medical device team right now, I perhaps would have some inherent competence that someone who hadn't had that experience may not have, but they could learn it. It would take 3 months, 6 months for them to learn it. So absolutely nothing that we're talking about is beyond the reach of the average salesperson to become somewhat exceptional.
I always go back to Roger Bannister and the 4-minute mile, and that's just when I say, "What if one person did it, I can do it." It's just if it's possible for one, and I feel that a lot of people are just so willing to make excuses. And I just think when you can kind of take accountability and ownership for that loss, or, like the laziness, and it's like, that's when I think for me anyways, that's when I start moving the needle, because I become aware that, well, if I was part of the problem, then I must be also part of the solution.
Sure. And so we have this assessment on the website. It's completely free. Tens of thousands of people have been through it, and over the years, we've narrowed down the traits of high performers and high performing salespeople, and small business owners take it as well, but mainly salespeople. And one of the traits is, obviously, as you've just outlined it there, is personal accountability. The people who are willing to go, okay, something happened in the market, but I didn't respond to it fast enough, they're the ones that are going to have success. The people who go, I sent this campaign on paper, I listened to Will, I followed some of the frameworks, I did everything I should, and it flopped for whatever reason. It's the people who go, okay, well, it's now my responsibility to work out why that is. On top of coaching or support from internal, external forces, whatever it is. It's the people who go, I'm going to resolve this. Who get, not just in sales, but it's these people who get on in life.
Yeah. And do you offhand, Will, just curious, know like maybe the top 3 to 5 traits of the top performers?
Yeah. So some of them are really obvious, like assertiveness. Some of them are less obvious, like not being a people pleaser, which is somewhat counterintuitive. You'd think someone who is a people pleaser, who goes above and beyond and out of their way for other people, would you'd think that prospects and buyers would like that, but they don't. They people pleaser typically does things that and then expects a result. They'll run around like a nutter and then expect the deal, but they won't assertively communicate that that's why they're going and doing the extra mile. So buyers prefer people who are not people pleasers. There's a ton of them: habits, goal setting, the level of productivity that people have, their ability to turn on a level of extroversion. So I'm an introvert, but I can turn on a level of extroversion. Optimism, we can go through them all kind of step by step, but they're the main ones that are personality traits that you may have been born and brought up in one direction, but you can absolutely turn on optimism. You can absolutely become more extroverted. You can control that the introverted nature that I have, which is to hide behind a screen, not do a podcast interview like this, and just try and do marketing rather than sales. That would be the typical pathway for an introvert, perhaps.
And what I see underneath all that is just a choice. Like, you have to choose to do that,
Yeah.
and that goes back to desire. If you want to be in service and help your prospects achieve a goal, solve a problem, and also help yourself, whatever that, get your Porsche, whatever's driving you, then you have to be able to lean into that.
Yeah, you've got to start you've got to start with the end in mind. You've got to understand what you're moving towards. Like, what do you want from this? For me, with salesman.com, I'm trying to retire early. I'm trying to stack a bunch of cash, invest it in really boring places where hopefully, barring like an alien invasion or something, it's going to be fine. It's going to grow 5-6% each year. And then I'm going to get on with the rest of my life and do whatever it is that comes from that. Probably get 15 golden retrievers and do loads of photography. That's probably, and then I'll start another business because I'm a psychopath and the cycle will never end. But this stage of my life is, building a level of wealth that then allows me to financially look after a family. And as I said, I got married a few months ago. And so all that kind of is all becoming a bit more real for me now, having a wife and all that kind of stuff. So that's the goal. So then it's, well, how much need in the bank? How much feasibly can you generate each year from a business without hiring a massive team? Because I like having the small team that we've got over at salesman.com at the moment. What can you do, change, influence, add, remove? And a lot of the time, my whole shtick is making selling simple. A lot of the time, it's what can we remove that either frees up time that allows us to do more of the right stuff, or what can we remove that just isn't moving the needle forward whatsoever.
And I think all those things are, what sales reps can do as well. Like, if they have a goal, and they reverse engineer. And a lot of times I say, if you have a framework, and I know you're a big proponent of a framework, but if you're going on a diagnosis or discovery call and you have the gaps or the information you require, it's like, okay, well, what questions do I need to ask that's going to get me this? And you only know that when you work in reverse. But even you mentioned friction, like, what are you doing that's adding friction to the buying journey? Like, is it Are you adding steps? Are you, not meeting them where they're at? And I feel so often we're looking at the buyers and going, oh, they're not doing this and they're not getting back to me. It's like, but hang on a minute, how lean are you? Like maybe they're not getting back to you because you're asking them to do things they've already done, or the pass off is redundant and they're like, they bounce. And so I think it's also an opportunity to hold the mirror to us and go, where are we adding friction? Even am I doing 2 calls when I can do 1? Like there's just always an opportunity to drive inner efficiencies as well that ultimately help your prospect get to where they want to go quicker.
Yeah, I'm working, right, it's dead funny. I'm working with a SaaS company at the moment. Got 15 reps or so, 14 reps, and they've been told they need to do a demo. I wasn't convinced that they needed to do a demo because the product's really well. I'll tell you about it off air if you like, but the product's really well known. Everyone knows what it does. And they're also doing demos with the financial decision maker who's not the end user, who just doesn't care. They do not care about the ins and outs, the buttons, what it does, what it doesn't. They just want some reporting that comes out the other end of it. That's what the financial, the CFO that they're selling to typically gets out of it. And simplification of data and a few other things. But they're doing this demo. I got them to stop doing the demo for a week. And they literally had, and I got them, even if they had a demo scheduled, to cancel a demo. And they had people going, thank goodness that I'm not, messages and conversations of thank goodness I didn't have to sit through this. I really appreciate we can move things forward. And it blew their minds. And it was just because they were following a process that everyone else has followed. And it seemed to them logical, but outside looking in, it was nonsensical. And that then is an hour not wasted for all the parties. It's 2 or 3 days either side of that shrinking the deal cycle length, because they're going to, can we do a demo next week? Okay, we'll get it done the week after. So it drags on and on. So it's cutting out that step, which, 3 or 4 days or a week either side gets cut out of it. Everyone's happier. They're absolutely made up that I came in and they think I'm a genius when I'm absolutely not. They think genuinely. They think the CMO the other day was literally used the word "you're a legend," and it's not at all. It's just that they were following a very rigid plan and they hadn't looked at their sales process in the past 3 or 4 years since when they were a tiny startup. Now they're a relatively fast-growing organization, but they were a startup and they maybe had to do a demo at that point because no one had awareness of who they are and what they did, and the process hasn't scaled with where they are in the market. So that's a really clear example, a recent example from my perspective of just removing the things that the buyer just doesn't care about. Some things you need to implement to educate them, help them understand the value that they're going to get from it. But most people are pretty well educated. They're going to watch videos. They're going to go online. They're going to look at reviews. The more that we can strip away and speed up the deal cycle process and solve the problem as quick as possible, right? When we frame it up like that, of if you're actually in pain, let's solve this quickly. That then builds momentum, and we do that by just removing anything that doesn't need to be in that process.
Well, I think time is currency, right? And so if you can save them time, I feel like everyone's buyer centric, but that is buyer centric. I'm not making you go through something you don't need to go through, but I also think when there's there's natural organic urgency in that situation that you want to align to that energy and build momentum. And the minute you start slowing them down, like you run the risk of the energy dying too, and then either going somewhere else or just not, or status quo kicking in. So I think it's you in their eyes, you're a legend. If someone's calling me a legend, I'll take it. But yeah, I think that's really great. And for anyone listening, like, you have to ask yourself, your buyers are usually 80% of the way down the process once they engage you.
Yep.
And because they're in that anonymous zone where they're kind of stalking you, they're looking at everything, they're reading G2, like they've done it. That's where meeting them where they're at is backing up a tiny bit just to validate, are they sophisticated? Are they not? Like, where do we need to start this from? And as a consumer, I appreciate that so much, because like the minute someone says, well, tell me why you're here, and I'm like, go talk to Jonathan because I talked to him twice. You guys need to connect the dots. It's just so frustrating.
Yeah, and a lot of it is resolved by asking the question, what do you think is the next step? Would it make sense to do this? If they say no, okay, what do you think the next step is? And I call it micro closing. There's lots of different variants of that process, but just constantly asking that and letting them guide you on what that process is, because you could have been selling the same tool, software, service for the past 20 years, but you've probably not sold into that specific account, unless you're upselling them or you're in account management. But net new business, you've probably not sold into that account before, and your organization hasn't sold into that account before. Maybe there's a quirk. Maybe there is some dude in procurement who has to look at every bit of paperwork the entire procurement team put through the office, and he's a pain in the ass, and you've got to get on his good side. And you don't know that until you ask the question of what do you think the next step is? How do we move this to, how do we get this resolved for you? These kind of questions. I think salespeople are sometimes reluctant because they want to look smart, they want to look intelligent, they want to look bright, which is fine. But to be slightly vulnerable in front of the buyer, and this isn't on your initial cold call, perhaps, this is further on down the sales process, but look slightly vulnerable and allow the buyer to coach you midway through your conversations with a buyer. You've got a good idea whether you've made a bold hypothesis of the problem that they have. You've done a diagnosis call, discovery call with them to understand whether that is true or false. You maybe have pivoted your hypothesis slightly. Maybe you're almost there, but we needed to kind of move in a slightly different direction. At that point, it's absolutely appropriate to say to someone, "Okay, what do you think the next step is here?" If they don't know the answer, you go, "Okay, well, working with similar companies to you in the past, the next step has been this, this, and this," and you can nudge them in the right direction. But I uncover so much from working with the sales clients that I do consulting with by just asking them, what do you think that you need here? Sometimes they're right, sometimes they're wrong. But getting that feedback, I think, is really valuable and keeps you on the right track, and can absolutely, it gives you permission to cut steps out of the process where you perhaps wouldn't otherwise.
Mhm. And for those listening that say, "You know what? It's your job to guide them along and you should know the next step." What would you say to those people that are thinking, you're balancing the vulnerability with the capability and the competence? Like, what would you say to those people?
Uh, I know you're playing devil's advocate there, but anyone who said that to me, I'd say you're an idiot. You, who knows the internal buying process of X large organization if you're doing a complex B2B deal more than the person who has run 25 deals through there in the past 7 years in their career? If, as I said, if they don't know the answer to that situation, then you can nudge them. Okay, previous customers have gone, I had to do this and this, or they've had to speak to procurement, or we've had to go to tender because it's over a certain price, which is the framework that we had selling medical devices to the NHS here in the UK. I knew all of this, but I would still ask the question and allow them to coach me somewhat. So I'm not being arrogant, so arrogant that I believe I know better than the buyer themselves. Again, sometimes they have no idea what they're doing. They're brand new to the role, and we can help them. And we can act as a Sherpa and guide them through their own buyer's journey. But a lot of the time, if you're doing complex software implementations, hardware, medical devices, there is probably somewhat of a rigid process in place. And our job is to help them navigate it, not to tell them perhaps exactly what they should be doing.
So what I'm hearing is empowering them so that they leverage their expertise internally, and then you pair that with your expertise of the implementation of the solution.
Individuals in the accounts will have a very specific understanding of the organization. Salespeople will have done that deal, that process many, many times. And so they've got a broader, more general knowledge of the deal. And they're the two things you need to know. The internal person, prospect, champion, decision maker, whoever it is going to be able to tell you, you need to speak to Sally. You're not going to know that until you ask. But you might know that Sally's in procurement at a mid level. This is a certain size deal that in your specific industry always goes to tender. So you might then nudge and go, okay, I'll speak to Sally. Would it make sense for you to introduce me to the head of procurement? Because it's probably going to have to go to tender because of the deal size. So you're working with the buyer as opposed to trying to beat them or manipulate them or bully them or influence them. If you are actually in a position to solve their problem, they want you to help. You just got to be there to offer that help when it's required.
It sounds like it's a balancing between telling and aligning.
Yeah, it's open ended questions, and if they don't have an answer, it's a closed ended question. It's no more complicated than that.
And so, for those who are showing up to calls without a bold hypothesis, what risk are they facing?
The phone getting slammed down on the face, like figuratively. If you cold call me and say, "Hey, I think we can generate more leads for salesman.com," obviously I'm going to be polite. Well, no one can cold call me because no one has my number. If you cold call me, there's a bounty out there. It's been out there for 10 years. If you cold call me, I'll give you $1,000. So it's kind of a bit of a shtick I've had with my audience over at Sales.com in the past, and now your audience as well, Karen. But with that said, if you cold call me and say we can generate more leads for Sales.com, I'm going to be polite. I'm going to listen to you because I'm a sales coach trainer, and typically want to help people. I want to help them. It might be the first call they've made in their career. Who knows? Most executives are going to give you another 3 seconds, and then the interest is just dying. The buyer's temperature is just dying all the time. If you come to me and say, "Hey, I see that you're really focused on YouTube this year. I just listened to one of your podcasts where you were talking about the fact that you've got a plaque on the wall that just says consistency, because that's what you're trying to really build in the business right now. I know that you want to sell the business in X number of years. That's why you've done the illustrated characters and blah, 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 blah." And obviously, this is not how you structure a cold call, but the message itself. I'd be going, "Great. How can I help you? What are you calling for?" Because and it's not because the person has taken the time, because I don't care that they've taken the time to help me. It's the fact that they are bold and specific, and then that sucks the person in as to, oh, maybe this person knows something that I don't. That's what you're trying to elicit. You're trying to build this curiosity, whether it's cold outreach, whether it's on LinkedIn, whether it's in person. You're trying to build the curiosity where the buyer they're sat there thinking, I've got to jump on a call with this person. Who knows what they're going to offer me? I'd be crazy not to spend that 10 minutes, 25 minutes with them. That's what we're trying to build. And that comes from having a bold hypothesis of their problem, and then not necessarily puking the whole shtick out on them, but giving them just enough to warrant, for example, on a cold call to go, would it make sense to jump on a quick call to run through this in more detail?
Mhm. And where would you suggest they come up with, like, would you leverage the triggers, or is it something different for developing a bold hypothesis? And the reason I'm asking that is so often I do cold call coaching and call reviews, and they all jump to the solution. We are the provider of this, and I'm like, okay, that's the solution. They don't know what problem that they have yet, and that's why I'm saying, like, a lot of times where they're like, well, I don't know either, and I'm like, well, you can say look for the top 2 to 3 challenges they're facing. One of them's got to be close to it, and then so they're kind of looking at that. They're looking at triggers, but I feel that people are just they're entering. It's a trailer, and they're starting in the middle, and people are like, well, what happened before that? And that's where they're not resonating, because there's no emotion, there's no, like you said, that specificity. That's like, you saw on my wall consistency, like that. If you saw that, and maybe most people others, what else are you seeing that I might not
Yeah.
be? And that's, like you said, there's intrigue there. There's like, you know what, I don't even know what problem I'm having, but the fact that you did that, I'm willing to give you time to see what else I can learn about myself.
Yeah. A lot of it is what you just outlined, which is understanding the buyer's problems, or at least having a strong hypothesis of the buyer's problem. If you're new to your sales role, you're kind of relying on onboarding and your colleagues and marketing to give you the gist of that. When you've had 25 calls and you've been called an idiot and the phone's been slammed down and you've had abuse, I hope you haven't, but maybe you've had some abuse hurled at you. At that point, you need to start testing. And as we touched on at the top of the episode, take personal accountability for uncovering what that pain is. You don't have to test a different variable on every single call, because some people will know what the pain is. Some people will realize there's something up, but they won't understand the specifics of the pain itself. But it's first understanding who the ideal customer persona is, a bold hypothesis of the pain, which again, you reverse engineer from your current customers or your colleagues, or heaven forbid you speak to marketing and maybe they've got some data on this, may or may not be useful. But at that point, we want to create a value proposition. And this is how we test it. The structure that I teach for value proposition is dead simple: is I help this person solve this problem in this way. And this way hopefully is novel or interesting, or makes people go, oh, you need to tell me more about that. And once you've got that structure, then you can start to test your hypothesis of value or hypothesis of the pain. Um, and we just do this over and over until you get something that, for the majority of a specific avatar that you reach out to, most of the time they go, "Oh, tell me more," or "I've not thought about that before." And that's then at the point where you go, "Okay, I've got this sliver of the market nailed. If I want to expand my outreach, I can either do more of this, or I can move on to the next one, and the next one, and the next one." So that's how practically we go about doing it. But yeah, the value proposition is something that's really key, and most salespeople can't tell you the value proposition of the organization or product in one sentence. They can tell you it in over a 6 minute conversation, but they can't tell you over a sentence. And it needs to be so succinct and sharp that it can be shared over, um, that short period of time, a sentence, 2 sentence tops. And then the only other thing to consider, and you kind of alluded to this earlier on, Karen, was or is that the buyer doesn't care about the features. They barely do they care about the benefits. The thing on the end of this, which no one ever talks about, is, or few people talk about, is the desires. So you've got company desires and you've got individual contributor desires. If I'm selling a tool to HR, maybe that HR person wants to keep their job because they're terrified of AI and automation and hiring automation or whatever it is. So I've got to pitch my value proposition to them, probably initially to get initial call booked in. Then, as the business case get built, as it gets bounced around internally, then we need to move up to the value proposition to the organization. What are they going to get out of it? Increase profits, reduce litigation and risk, become more efficient. Essentially, in a large to or medium size or large organization, that's all they care about at an executive level. So that's what we're trying to lean into. So you've got multiple levels of value propositions: individual, organizational. The individual ones leaning into people's actual desires. That's what typically gets that first meeting booked in. And then you can, once you got the meeting booked in, then you can assess the lay of the land and try and get a bit deeper and really better understand what the problem is that the buyer's facing.
And all great stuff. And I know in my corporate career, and I coach to this, it's always like when you're dealing with that organizational level, look at the corporate initiatives that, the pillars that they're aligning to, and always get your solution under one of them, because they have to, like, that's how they're incented at the end of the year. So in essence, you're helping them, hit their performance objective. But I think people are just, they're too generic, and it's just like dotted back line to the person, and like what would be important for this person, how are they measured. And one thing I say is go on indeed.com or like some job and go like, what are their roles and responsibilities. If it is HR, is it absenteeism, is it morale, is it productivity? Well, how does your solution like align back to that? Because that's when we're problem centric or more strategic versus the product. Because if you're leaning on the product, they're going to pull out the spreadsheet and say, okay, Will, there's you and 4 other people like you, and you further commoditize yourself. And so I love what you're saying of just when you're talking to the individual, who is that person? What do they care about? How are they measured? But then when you move up, like above the line, what do they care about? And they always say you'll be delegated down to the person you sound like. So make sure you sound like that person that you want to.
Yeah, and we touched on a litmus test earlier on that I use of our students in our program. There's a second one which is slightly vulgar, and I'll mind my language. I appreciate that you have me on your show. I don't want to abuse everyone's ears, but you should absolutely ask the question: does this person give an S about this message, this phone call, the value proposition that I'm going to share, this demo, this meeting, the fact that I'm going to introduce them to our CXO to take this conversation further? If they don't give an S about any of that stuff, then either you're doing it wrong or you shouldn't be doing it. It's almost as black and white as that.
And what you said before, just by taking information for every call and applying it to the next, and I always say like that rolling stone gathering moss. And I just think even that assumption, if it's not a bold hypothesis, is kind of weak, but then they give you a nugget, you bring that into the next call and the next call. So you're always gathering information that when you get 10 or 15 in, you've got accuracy that based on these past calls that this CMO in this industry, when they've been there for 12 to 18 months, these are the challenge. This is what's hot on their radar. So it's not like, I think it's this, like, I just think when there's ambiguity and there's vague anything, whether it's the title, whether it's the problems, your message is just on the surface. And when I look at my inbox and all the stuff out there, everyone is playing on the surface. And the more you know and the more specific you are is what's going to get through.
Yeah, and sometimes having a bold hypothesis which is wrong still elicits more meetings than a weak hypothesis that people are happy just to delete because they're just like, this is just spam. I'm not interested. If you make a bold hypothesis and show some intelligence, people will, not everyone, but some people will still want to meet with you because they might go, well, oh, we've just solved that problem. The next step is this. Could you potentially help with that? So, and I guess we should probably clarify what a bold hypothesis is before we kind of get everyone, because it's kind of ambiguous somewhat, isn't it? It's you can only understand a bold hypothesis, that statement, in comparison to a weak hypothesis. But a weak hypothesis might be, we'll help you find more leads. A bold hypothesis might be, I see that you're doing this. I think we can solve X problem to double your ROI on what you're already doing. That would be a bolder hypothesis than, I think we can generate more leads for your organization.
Mm-hmm. No, for sure. And I like what you said. Even if you're off or it's incorrect, the fact that they just solved it, you're on the scent. It's not like totally wrong industry. I just think you showed up to the party with something versus empty handed. You're
Yep.
better than the guy who showed up in his overalls after work and has nothing,
For
you
sure.
know?
For sure.
And I think a point of view, because the hypothesis point of view, is just the angle you come at. And I always say, like, all you need is an opening. And for them to just pause and instead of going, well, this is the way we've always done it, and like that's just basically no commitment to change. But if someone just interrupts my pattern of thinking, like that's it. You got me. I'm like, that is an opening. And then the next thing is, does it make sense to book a call? But I just think so many people are like, I didn't get the sale. And I'm like, well, you have a 12 to 18-month sales cycle. You're not going to get it on call one anyway, but you just need that opening. And that's where that point of view or that hypothesis comes in. Even if it's wrong, you've shown them something or you've invited them to come at it from a different perspective. That's fresh. That's like a new, like they're going to go home and talk about that at the dinner table.
Yep. And there's different ways to do this, right? So you can introduce pattern interrupts. So if I'm cold calling from our consultancy at salesman.com and trying to book meetings with VPs of sales, almost everyone, when I get to the point of the call of the cold call where I'm asking, how's the sales team doing? Oh, the sales team doing great. It's doing fantastic. Because they just want to get you off the call. They're in the middle of a spreadsheet. They're in the bathroom. You can't tell because they're on the phone, but they're having a wee. They picked up the phone because the number is similar to the daughters or something. So I will then. This isn't using a bold hypothesis. This isn't particularly intelligent, but I'll laugh it off and go, oh, so everyone's hitting quota then. And obviously everyone is hitting quota. So now they've got to think of a response to you. You've taken them out of this step by step by step, just robotic, reptilian brain processing that they're in. And now they have to come up with some smart ass response back to you. And they can't because again, you've interrupted the pattern of thinking. Then you go, hey, look, no, we might not be able to help. I might be able to help. Would it make sense to jump on a quick 5-minute call? I'll run through how we work and, blah, 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 blah. But that is often enough, especially at the top end of the sales process, just to knock people out of, respectfully. And I do it and it's a joke and people tend to laugh back at it when I do it. Because obviously it's audacious to tell a sales trainer that absolutely everyone is hitting quota and everything's fantastic, because you should, if that was the case, you should double all the quotas and double the revenue of the organization. So finding one or two things like that you can say, which seems quick-witted, it's not, because it's practiced, it's rehearsed, it's formulated ahead of time. That can also get people to go, fine, tell me more. You've sucked me in, tell me more, and then you can deliver the value and up the level of professionalism after that.
Yeah, but like you said, it's expected behavior. Everyone sounds the same. And the minute you can introduce like a mirror or a label or something that just invites them to go, obviously there's a lie there. Like if they're doing great, then you're right. Like why are they not hitting quota? So one of those is not true. But I think people are afraid to just, I always say, like, be free, like dance in the moment. If they say that, don't look down. I'm like, no, what do I say? I'm like even fall on your own sword, like, oh, my
Yep.
bad. Or like,
It's
I just think
funny.
the
Who
more real
cares?
you are,
Who cares? It
it's
just
like,
doesn't matter.
it doesn't matter. But people are so, and I don't know if this is leadership and saying, don't deviate from the script or something. I'm like, no, do deviate. Here's a framework. These are the 3 things you got to cover. But that's where the art comes in. Do it what makes you feel right. Like if you don't want to use the word epic and that's what your script says, don't use the word epic.
Yep.
But if someone says I'm on my way to the ER, don't be like, this is going to take 30 seconds. Like, you got to be able to think on your feet in that moment.
Yeah, you absolutely got to be congruent, and this is where scripts kind of fall apart. And so I help people build a framework. Now, then I will review people's calls, and if they're saying something dumb or they use terrible tonality or they're too fast or too slow, whatever it is, we can coach them on it. But that's why I don't lean into a word by word script, because whoever wrote it is not the person typically who's delivering it, who's not the person then 6 months later who's delivering it when they've hired another 15 people. It just gets diluted and diluted and diluted. So a framework of question this, question that, question this, some ideas, some suggestions, and then allowing people to put not too much of their own spin on it, especially at the top of the sales process. We want to have some consistency so we can test, so we know what's working, what isn't, so we can move forward. But towards the middle, towards the end of the sales process, absolutely, it's a conversation. It's not some formulaic process. It's a process, and so some of it's formulaic in the structure of a meeting. But I love going absolutely down rabbit holes with buyers, and we go completely off tangent and off the track. It's your job to bring it back on track and refocus the conversation afterwards. But that's how you build rapport. And that's sometimes how you actually get to the bottom of why they're speaking to you in the first place.
Yeah, and you're able to connect with them, in a different level. And we've kind of morphed into the cold calling. And just while we're there, can you give us like 3 tips that you're seeing top performers doing that are excelling? Because cold calling is a tough gig these days. I think most people are not answering their phone that if they don't recognize a number. So just kind of in wrapping up, is there 2 or 3 things that those who are cold calling could be really focusing on to help them in that channel?
So I don't know it's true that people aren't answering the phones. If you phone a farmer who's out on a tractor all day, he's probably going to answer his phone. If you phone a millennial marketing manager that works from home, they're probably not going to answer the phone unless they reckon they're not. And a millennial myself, right? I'm at the top end of millennial. They're probably not going to answer the phone. So you've got to communicate in the way that your market wants to be communicated to. You don't get to decide that. If you want to make decent money, you can do what you want. If you don't want to make any money, but if you want to make some money, decent money, you have to communicate in the way that your market wants it to communicate. So that's the first thing. There's a lad in the training program, lovely lad, he's crushing it. He sells services to pub landlords here in the UK. Pub landlords answer the phone immediately and will come and see him. And so we've absolutely removed emails, LinkedIn, anything else from the process because almost every call he has, he books a meeting. Now, the quality of the meetings are things we need to improve. And there's certain things we can do on our cold calls to pre-qualify someone and help them understand that we are not after just to pop in and shake hands. We're after an actual sit-down meeting. So the subtleties there, but depending on the market and the people that you're selling to, not all of them, but some of them, absolutely cold calling works amazingly well, and people do pick up the phone. So that's the first thing. Second thing is to have some kind of strategy. As we mentioned, I am not a big advocate of a script, but if you need a script to make your first 100 calls, then fine. Because it takes 100 calls or so to get over the hump, if you're new to sales, to get over that hump of just getting your bum in the seat and getting the job done. You might book no meetings, but you will absolutely improve, and which brings up the next point in a second, but you absolutely improve inherently by just doing the thing over and over again, which then leads us to recording your calls. If you can, obviously, there's different legalities, different places, different states. But if you can record your calls and listen back to them, that is the quickest, without coaching, without reading a book, without watching some nonsense. And I create loads of YouTube content, but watching some nonsensical YouTube content on cold calling, right? There's loads of crap out there. Just listening back to your own calls, if you've got an ounce of intelligence, you'll go, oh, that fell a bit flat. I probably shouldn't say that again. Or every time I do this, I get that response. And you can start to work out what's working and what isn't. And then the final thing, Karen, and we kind of touched on this earlier on, is it's just a game. Nobody has ever cold called an individual, and that individual has been so annoyed, they've got in the car, driven over to the salesperson's office, and beat the crap out of them with the bare fists, right? I don't think it's happened. I'm pretty sure it hasn't happened. I don't know anyone it's happened to, but that is obviously so crazy, right? So to be nervous of cold calling, if you've not done it before, fine. You just got to get those first 100 done, use a script, use whatever crutches you need to get over that hump. But once you've been doing it in a while, it's just a game. There are only so many variables. There are only so many inputs. There are only so many variables. The feedback loop is pretty short and sharp on a cold call. It's not like you're going to spend 8 months doing a big, complex B2B deal and then learn what happened at the end of it where you went wrong. You're going to know whether you booked the meeting or not, whether the person was interested or not, whether you sparked that little bit of curiosity where the person goes, oh. And sometimes like, you got me. You've sucked me in. And they'll joke about it because no one wants to book a meeting on the back of a cold call when they first jump on it. And so, with treating it professionally and appropriately for the organization that you're representing, but doing it with perhaps a slightly lighter heart is typically the best way to go about doing it. Not take anything personally and you treat it like a game.
All great points. And I think one of the areas to stress is just not everyone, like it's not dead because it's a multi-channel approach, but like look at your audience. And I think that's when you test in those initial phases, like, are they responding to text, LinkedIn, email, or call? Like, and that's when you can start tracking those things and saying this, is there trends or patterns with this persona or is it just this person? But in order to figure that out, you got to do it.
Yep.
And also what you said is just like the whole self-awareness piece, I think, is very important. And this is where call coaching or just watching your recording with nobody watching it. We all know when you're like, oh, shoot, I totally overspoke there, or that sounded very salesy. But I just think when you look at, did I get that commitment or did I achieve that milestone? Like, that's your indicator that I did it right. Because so often people are like, I got it. And I'm like, that's great. Like, what did you do to move forward? I have no idea, but like, what they're going to buy. And I just think if you don't know what you're doing positively or negatively, like you can't repeat it. And so that level of self-awareness, it's kind of like that puppet. When I do this, they do this. Okay. So either do more of that or stop doing it. And I just think that allows you to play the game. And I don't like saying a game because it's almost like there's a manipulation part, but it allows you to show up knowing what works, and ultimately it's to help our customers. So if we can be more self-aware that when we do this, we can compress the sales cycle, we get them to share this or this, like do more of it. It's kind of easy when you think about it like that.
Yeah. And just to clarify that from a game perspective, I'm playing Tetris. You can't manipulate Tetris. I've got variables going in. There's a system of results coming out the other end. I get feedback. I win. I lose. I try to improve my inputs that come back into the system. So yeah, absolutely. We're not trying to manipulate anyone. And to be frank, to the audience, I'm going to listen back to this podcast episode whenever it comes out, and I will critique myself. And what I do at the end of every one of these, when we wrap up in a second, I'm going to ask you, what could I have done differently? And you could absolutely be you'll not hurt. Well, you might hurt my ego a little bit, but you won't absolutely kind of embarrass me, and so you can be as harsh as you like, Karen. But that's how I'm doing a lot more podcast interviews now. That's how I'm going to improve at that skill, and it's the same with everything other than playing in the NBA, where you got to be 7'3". Most other things in life, it's an iterative process of self improvement, and you might not become number one, but the third best sales person in the country is still making a load of money, right?
Mm-hmm. Or just 1% better than you were yesterday.
Yep.
I think that's great. And just always wanting to get better. And I'm the same. I'm always looking for feedback because, even as long as I've been doing it, there's always room for improvement. So I love that you said that. For those listening, Will, and are thinking, love the simplicity of his frameworks, really want to learn more about Will or his programs, what's the best way for people to get in touch with you?
So will@salesman.com is my email address. Before you email me, go to salesman.com. The books are available for free. There's a free community on there. There's a free sales code assessment. Essentially, everything I know about sales is available in those books. All I charge for is people who want to speed up the process of implementation. So you'll know if you're a good fit if you want to work with me, having gone through some of the content. But yeah, head over to salesman.com, check out the books, and abuse it all, rip it off, kind of leverage it, make some money, and then maybe we can work together in the future.
You can sell your business quicker.
Yeah. Help me retire. That's the premise of this podcast episode. Help me retire, buy a camper van, and be out with my 14 golden retrievers.
That's funny. Well, listen, I want to thank you so much for sharing your insights, all the tactics for 2024, and really focusing on that bold hypothesis, coming with a point of view, I think is a huge differentiator. So thanks so much. And thank you everyone for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.